Apartheid bestowed a mixed economic legacy to South Africa, creating appalling levels of marginalization and exclusion structured along racial lines. With the impending political transition and concerns with the future course of policies, the budget deficit in South Africa widened from 2.4% of GDP in 1990 to 7.5% in 1992.
South Africa was a very different country. Obviously, the apartheid regime was politically isolated, both at home and abroad. And the economy was not performing very well for many reasons. It was a highly unequal economy. Servicing the budget at those times was very unfair. The distribution of expenditure on public education, healthcare was really for the white minority in the main. And the economy was stagnating. It wasn't growing very fast. Investor confidence was extremely low. And if you remember, the business community started visiting the ANC in exile to start speaking about the transition because they realized it was a dead-end path under the apartheid government. There needed to be a transition away from apartheid towards a more inclusive economy.
According to Professor Astian Calitz, who was Director General at Treasury in 1993, the new government did not start with a clean fiscal slate, adding that it had a critical political commitment to improve the coverage and quality of public service delivery to the majority of the population, in order to remedy the racially based distortions of the past.
South Africa came out of a period where, in the apartheid years, the country experienced first trade sanctions and then also financial sanctions. So that was, in a sense, at the start of the 90s, was the context in which South Africa found itself. From the financial side, increasing inability to access financial markets.
A consensus emerged on the need to initiate fiscal adjustment in order to restore confidence and provide policy guidance through the transition. A credit arrangement was agreed with the IMF in December 1993 to help mitigate the adverse effects of lower mining exports and a surge of grain imports.
What then came about are two very important documents. The first was what became known as the Reconstruction and Development Program, RDP, the white paper on the RDP, which was released in 1994, if my memory serves me right. Then, in 1996, GEAR, the Growth, Employment and Redistribution Strategy, which also ignited a lot of criticism from people that regarded that as the South African version of neoliberalist economics.
From the year 2000 to 2008, the world economy went through what economists describe as a benign period of relatively good growth and low inflation. A major benefit for South Africa was the high commodity prices, driven in large part by the expansion and growth of the Chinese economy.
Growth was pretty consistent throughout the world, and inflation was very low. And the third characteristic, which is very important for South Africa, was that there was a commodity super cycle. The commodity prices around the world rose very sharply, driven in large part due to the entry of China very successfully into the world economy. So China was becoming a manufacturing hub for the whole world, but it didn't have the natural resources that it needed to drive that. And South Africa was one of the sources of the coal, the iron ore, the manganese, all those prices were really, really high.
Although the South African economy grew consistently in this period, the AIDS crisis reduced the life expectancy levels in South Africa, creating pressure on government to roll out ARVs and respond to the crisis.
One of the economic indicators, if you look back at the data that was really bad, was the falling life expectancy among South Africans. You know, life expectancy is an indicator of general health and wealth in your population. But because of the AIDS pandemic, there was a falling life expectancy, dramatically falling. And there was a lot of pressure on government to correct its stance on AIDS and to begin to roll out the treatment that was needed.
The ejection of former President Thabo Mbeki from the presidency raised concerns amongst the business fraternity that Finance Minister Trevor Manuel would be ejected, paving the way for fundamental change in economic policy. Globally, the Great Recession struck.
This all came to a crashing halt in 2007, 2008, with what when we teach our students, we call it the Great Recession. It's in the textbooks as the Great Recession. And in that period, there was a bad management of the financial and banking system in the United States in particular, where they had a bubble around the property market and related securities and financial investments, which corrected very sharply. So things that were worth billions on Monday would be worth virtually nothing on Tuesday. You know, things lost their value when there was an exposure of the mismanagement in the banking system. And when it rains in the United States, the whole world has to put up its umbrellas and the whole world gets affected.
The swearing in of President Cyril Ramaphosa as head of state in 2018, after predecessor Jacob Zuma reluctantly resigned on orders of the ANC, hailed a new dawn. But in 2020, the fallout from COVID-19 severely set back the development trajectory of South Africa and exacerbated an already difficult fiscal challenge.
I think for me, the important things at this point, the real constraint on the economy at the moment is Eskom. That's the major thing that needs to be addressed and not by way of intention, but by way of action. We need to see, whether it's in the budget or in the president's speech at some point when his vote is up in parliament or wherever, but the government needs to come up with a plausible and credible plan to get the growth rate of the economy up. And that involves many more things than you can actually expect from a budget.